This story takes place during the summer when I was 15. This is a very true story about a small encounter I had. I was living with my dad and stepmother at the time. I remember my stepmother throwing a royal fit about buying me new school clothes because I'd let a few pairs of pants get holes in them and still wore them. It was my first year going into high school, and I wasn't going to let her spoil that for me. So I went to stay with my grandparents for the summer to earn some money. They live in a remote small area that was once home to many native tribes, most prominently the Quinault tribe. It's very secluded, despite being only a mile or so from the highway, and it's all lush, gorgeous forest. My grandpa had built his own 3-story house and a shop, where he cut and assembled cedar into roofing products. That's where I came in, hauling heavy chunks of cedar to his van, stacking, nailing, cinching up, shaking and shingling into bundles to be sold. I made good money while there, and was able to buy an entire new wardrobe. As summer was coming to an end, and it was too hot to work, I decided to take a walk one day. Now let me say that I spent my childhood roaming these woods. Armed with my grandparents' 2 dogs, we ran and played and napped all day, and I'd never seen anything out of the ordinary, or gotten any weird vibes. I waited until it was a bit cooler in the evening and started out, walking a little path that would take me out to an old, unused logging road. I had tread this same path so many times that I wasn't even paying attention until I felt I was being watched. I'd like to note here that I was young at the time. I'd yet to touch drugs or alcohol, and I have no history of hallucination or mental illness along those lines. What I saw still haunts me to this day. There he was, standing naked in the middle of my path, looking down at me with a blank expression. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, much taller than my 5-foot nothing. He had long, matted black and grey hair, and there were tufts of it growing from the sides of his arms and legs as well. There were no genitals, only smooth flesh where they should be. And his skin, it was such a sickly pale yellow and looked to be too big for stature and hung in some spots. We made eye contact. His yellow orbs felt like they were staring into my soul. I couldn't move or think. Everything had gone silent around me. The next 10 or so seconds of my life seemed to stretch out. We just stood looking at one another before he swiftly turned and walked back into the trees. The foliage went undisturbed as he melted through it and disappeared. I honestly expected him to charge me or at least be intimidating, but he just turned and left. I haven't seen him since either, nor am I too enthusiastic to go out looking. I remember telling my grandma about it, but she just told me it was probably drug addicts, as the area she lives in has a very high number of users and manufacturers of methamphetamine. My name is Daniel, and I live alone. Just for a little bit of context, my father passed away in May of last year, coming up on 2 years. He and I were extremely close, and since his passing, I've been feeling really down, and I've been mourning his loss since. I'm not one to believe in the paranormal, but a ton of strange things have happened since his passing, and I can't explain any of them. Someone please help me, if they can, with what they think and what I can do. The first strange occurrence that happened was a random-ass phone call, just a month after his passing. However, the strange part about this is that my phone had never rang, nor were there any other phones in the house. My first thought was that there was an intruder in my house, and after searching the entire house, checking security cameras, nothing came up. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me, so I brushed it off. That sadly wasn't the final occurrence. Fast forward a few months, and again, that phone going off starts up again. This time, me and a friend were in the house just talking about personal stuff, and when the phone went off, we both heard it. The noise literally sounded as if it was in front of us, not from a distance away. For a second time, my friend and I started searching, this time going into the attic, basement, still nothing. This is where I started getting paranoid. The following set of occurrences happened just in the span of the last couple months, from September all the way to just 3 days ago. On the 21st of September, it was a chilly day, so I kept every window closed and put on a show on the television. It was a show my father and I used to sit back to and enjoy, and suddenly I got hit with a gust of wind. I checked to see if it was the window that had maybe not been shut all the way, but every single window was closed. Now I knew for sure something was up. 2 months later is probably the weirdest thing to happen. As I just came home from work, I get a call on my phone which says no caller ID. And this was around the time I was answering important calls for work, so I picked it up. However, there's static on the other end, and just faintly, before the call ended, I heard what sounded like my dad saying my name before the call hung up. I instantly called my service provider to see if they could track the call, but nothing showed up on their end. No bill, no call history, nothing. I had no idea what to think, and as I'm typing this, I still don't know how to wrap my head around this. However, the most disturbing thing to happen was a few nights ago. I was heading to bed because I had to go to work early that morning, and before closing my eyes, I heard what sounded like a groan coming from 5 feet in front of me. I instantly searched the area and nothing was there. I didn't get sleep that night, and I felt a pain in my chest from that moment. And just about an hour ago, I felt another gust of wind in my room, with everything closed. This story is from a few years ago. I'm from India, and we used to live in a joint family of 8 with my maternal grandparents. I've had a few experiences in this ancestral home where things go missing and appear after a couple of days, hearing family members call out to me when they actually didn't. A few instances of seeing shadows and other things move at the corner of my eye. Moving on to the story. We've never had any dogs as pets due to my family's staunch belief in Islam. We happened to get a puppy for a friend, and due to unavoidable reasons, had to keep the puppy at home for a night. The pup cried all night, and at around 2:30 a.m, my grandma called me and my uncle and asked us to keep the puppy upstairs, away from their room, as it was a constant disturbance. So we decided to keep the puppy in my bathroom until morning, where the pup continued to cry. It was around 3 a.m. when the puppy finally stopped, and I was about to get to sleep, when suddenly I heard something that sounded like a pretty clear whisper in my ear, and the pup started crying loudly once again. This freaked me out, because when we were growing up, we were taught that dogs could see ghosts and spirits. I still don't know whether this was all a coincidence, or whether there's something more to it. I recently came across this awesome list of haunted roads and decided to look into each of the ones listed. Some are more spooky than others, but I decided to start out with the one that piqued my interest the most. In addition to having the country's longest wait for a traffic light, a 5-minute average, Clinton Road is known for not only being haunted, but also for legends of sinister groups meeting in secret. The 2-lane 18th century road, desolate and only recently completely paved, is also rumoured to be a popular dump site for organised crime members, with one instance of this being confirmed in the 1980s. Hauntings and oddities. Ghost Boy Bridge. Some tales say that if you leave a quarter on the yellow line of the bridge over Clinton Brook, Dead Man's Curve, that the ghost of a boy who died there will return it for you. Some other legends state that the same ghost boy will push you over the edge of the bridge to keep you from being hit by a car, as he was. The haunted Camaro belongs to a girl who supposedly crashed it in the late 1980s. In the legends, any mention of driving at night will trigger this haunting. One person claimed that they were camping near Terrace Pond and came upon 2 park rangers. It was later found that the park rangers were killed in the 1930s while on the job. Ghost cars. On an episode of the Travel Channel's Most Haunted, Some claimed that they've been chased by only the headlights of phantom cars that trailed them till they reached the end of the road, while others claimed to have seen ghost trucks. Strange animals. There have been claims of seeing a hellhound named Wolfie, as well as other strange creatures. While some do not believe this to be supernatural, they do believe that the mutated animals could have been survivors from the former jungle habitat attraction that closed in the 1970s. The Cross Castle. Built in 1905 and destroyed just 14 years later, the castle sat near the reservoir until it was gutted by fire, leaving only the stone wall standing. In the 50s, it became a popular sport for teenagers to drink and do drugs. It was eventually demolished in the 1980s as an attractive nuisance, but the foundations remain. Accounts range from people seeing strange figures standing around to having severe seizures that left them with strange bruises. The Druidic Temple. This one is easily debunked, as it's just a former iron smeller that was built in the 1980s. Despite this, many have claimed that it's a site of Druidic worship and where they do their rituals. It's not easy to get to after having been gated off for public safety. I'm 22 now, but when I was 14, I was starting to be allowed to stay home alone. But in most cases, it was only for an hour or two at a time. I live in a small town where most of the exciting things that happen are seen on TVs. I was raised by my grandparents, my parents split, and my father died when I was 6. Anyway, my grandparents' house is very old. It was built in the late 1800s, which likely means quite a few people have lived and passed away in the house. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was home by myself. Most of the time, I played on my console. I didn't have many friends, so gaming was and is still my thing. Now the basement is very creepy. It's one of those old basements with stone walls, very horror-like. Unfortunately for the scaredy cat teenage me, I had to go into the basement because that's where the washer and dryer are. I swallowed my fear and went down into the basement to grab some clothes to wear after I took a shower. Now I'm always a very situationally aware person. I'd always be checking corners to make sure there were no serial killers watching me. Irrational, I know. Being in the basement, though, made me a bit more edgy, so I grabbed my clothes, turned my head back to the stairs, but for whatever brilliant unknown reason, I looked in one of the corners again, and for a few seconds, I saw this dude in a black, ritual-like gown. He was bald, and his eyes were pitch black. He was tall as well, and the basement itself wasn't that high, so his head was pivoted to avoid hitting the ceiling. But I noped the hell out of there as fast as my fat body could go. Right up the steps, slammed the basement door, sat myself down on the living room couch and didn't budge. Went nowhere near that door. My grandparents got home a bit later. They were at church during an event, and I told them what the hell I had just seen in the basement. They weren't too surprised. I mean, religious people usually aren't when you tell them something paranormal like that. But the basement got a blessing from my grandfather. Never saw anything in the basement since. In 1995, my grandma died. She had some heart issues. Surgery wasn't able to correct her, and the surgeon had accidentally nicked her heart with a scalpel during the last surgery, and she died a few days later. My mum lived down the street from her, and one of her sons lived about 4 hours away and would often come visit. He would often bring his cat. A few years prior, my nan wasn't watching when she went outside and accidentally let the cat out. She didn't notice until later that day, and after searching the woods behind their house, the cat just never showed up again. A few years went by, and my uncle had come back multiple times to visit. We always assumed the cat either found a new home or was hit by a car, or who knows. My nan always felt bad about it. So the night we had the open casket and some ceremony, we spent a few hours crying over her. I was about 10 or 11 years old and don't remember much, except sitting beside my grandpa, who was just broken. We all left the funeral home and returned back to my grandparents' house. My uncle was the first one to arrive back at the door. Laying on the welcome mat was a black and white cat. His cat. In Canada, they tattoo a number inside the ear that identifies the owner in the system, so it was 100% his cat. Odds are that it had another family for those 2 or 3 years, and it was a shame they believed they'd lost a cat, but my uncle got his back. The cat was just waiting there days after she passed away, waiting at the door to be let back inside. It's a crazy coincidence, but most of the family assumed it was my nan righting a wrong. A few years ago, after I'd graduated from Bible college, a group of college friends and I had been out for coffee and chatting late enough that the shop had to close. We didn't feel like we were done hanging out, so because this was the town I had lived in for the past 12 years, my 3 friends asked me where was a cool place to hang out, preferably a place that didn't have hours of operation. Didn't take long for me to remember this nature centre near my old high school that had a beautiful walking path that went around a small lake, so I suggested there, and off we went. We parked in a public lot in front of the school, so there was no risk of towing or tickets, and we walked across the football and track field towards the nature centre path. Now the walking paths were closed off by an almost complete fence, as you were supposed to enter by the main gates at the pavilion. But because I had been in photography class in the high school, we had found a way in for free that didn't also require a long walk to the pavilion, about a half-kilometre away. Just up the sidewalk beside the football field, the fence turned to cut through some trees. But in the trees, there was no fence, so you could easily get in if you were okay with a little foliage. Just up the hill from this line of trees also happened to be the city's graveyard, which was also right beside a mental health hospital that was about 100 years old. While my friends and I walked up to the slight hill to the trees, one of them spotted the gravestones and inquired about what else was there. Immediately, everyone forgot about the nature centre walk, and we continued up the hill to what I thought was a small cemetery. Being that I'm already sensitive to spirits, I gave a little prayer that the Holy Spirit would protect me, but also show us if there was an area we should go. We walked around the small section, occasionally feeling the need to pray for an unrestful spirit to be at rest, until we discovered that the cemetery continued up on the next level of the hill, and actually stretched for 1 kilometre or so back. We continued to walk around, sometimes praying, sometimes just noticing the ages on the stones, maybe appreciating a cool name here and there. One of my friends, Eric, also seemed to be sensitive to spirits, but whereas I was turned away by how negative and possibly dangerous some seemed to be, he was drawn to those same ones. Occasionally, there were plots where he lingered, and I felt my spirit become heavy. But on those we'd pray for peace, and once it felt more clear, we'd move on. As we walked east towards the back of the cemetery, I could sense something very unsettled in the far corner. I prayed again for protection for mine and my friend's spirits as we got closer, but I couldn't shake this growing feeling that I specifically was being watched by something in that corner. As we got to that last row, my friends ventured north to each plot, but I decided it was best to stay further away, fully aware that not only was this spirit unsettled, it was angry. I told them about it, and they prayed as much as they could, but neither of them could sense or feel it, so they prayed wherever I pointed or gestured to. Eric, however, seemed quite content to linger in that last row, even hanging back for a while as we moved on. As we turned to walk south, away from the angry spirit, I could feel the eyes burning into my back, giving me chills like I'd never experienced. I continued to pray for our safety, focusing more specifically on me, but it seemed that almost every word I whispered in prayer, the angrier it got. Until this point, any spirit we prayed over either found peace, or at least stayed where it had been. Not this one. As we moved further away, I could feel it was just as close. My 2 friends decided it would be best to have one on each side of me, almost as protection, and they had hoped that as Eric was further behind, that would cover my back. It didn't. We kept walking and it kept following, getting angrier and angrier as we went. I'd check over my shoulder over and over, almost expecting to see some sort of creature physically following. But still, it was only an extra dark shadow, almost unnoticeable, almost excusable. There came a point as we neared the southernmost path that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I couldn't feel it anymore. It was gone. It was like it had reached its tether point and could go no further. I breathed deeply and relaxed. We were finally in the clear. We turned west and kept walking, and we could see our exit only a few rows away. My friend on my left got distracted by a cool gravestone and stepped away from my side completely, which I had barely noticed. Then it touched me. Being suddenly surrounded by a spirit of fury, it grabbed my shoulder, and I felt its hot breath as it whispered into my ear. I didn't even give it time to say something I'd remember or understand. I just yelped and jumped away, hopefully out of its grasp. All three of my friends jumped into defensive mode and prayed for it to leave me. And once it had been pushed far back enough, we booked it out of the exit. Just outside the exit, a security guard from the mental health home was looking in, probably concerned that he saw 4 young people walking around the cemetery. As we booked it past him, he asked if we were in danger, and we honestly didn't know how to answer him, as most people laugh at us when we explain how real spirits and ghosts are. Not stopping to talk, we passed the man and continued back down the hill towards the school, the guard just staring into the cemetery, looking for what we were running from. The whole way back to my car, my friends were praying that if the spirit had attached itself to me, that the bond would be broken. And before we got in the car, they prayed more. And the whole drive home, they prayed it wouldn't and couldn't follow. And before we walked into my apartment, they gave a final prayer that it was not welcome and couldn't enter. I was supposed to just drop them off, and they would drive the hour back home so they could work in the morning. They didn't leave me alone that night, and I don't think any of us really slept, even though it was stone cold silent until the sun came up. I work full-time as an EMT in a private ambulance company. We had an inter-facility transfer from our local hospital to one a bit more advanced. This was an ALS transfer, so my partner, the paramedic, was in charge of patient care. I was driving and had the camera on that lets me see into the back of the truck. Just so everyone knows, this camera doesn't record. It just allows me to make sure my partner is safe and let me know when my partner is starting an IV or something that needs extra smooth driving. My partner turned off the lights in the back so our patient could sleep, so the camera went into night vision mode, which is a black and white camera. At first, I didn't notice anything. Then I saw a little white dot floating around on the camera. I figured it was a bug and didn't think much about it. Then more and more of them started showing up until there were like 7 of them. I still just figured it was just a lot of bugs. Then I saw it. There was a figure standing in the back corner of the ambulance. I told myself over and over again that it was just a smudge on the camera. After we dropped our patient off at the hospital, we made our way back to the station because it was almost the end of our shift. I would have continued thinking it was bugs and a smudge if what happened next never happened. When we got back into our ambulance, the smudge and the flying orbs were gone. We got back to our station and had to finish our reports for the day. So we were sitting in the lounge chairs in the station, and one of the radios that were off and on, their charger, turned, and then off and on, and then off and on and off. It kept doing this until my partner went over to check it. This is when I told my partner what I saw on the camera. We both started getting a little creeped out. We submitted our reports and went to clock out. In the room where we clock out is a computer that lets you see what the cameras are recording around the station. My partner says she sees something walking around the 2 ambulances in the bay. This is great, because we still need to put our computer back into the ambulance. I went out to the bay, put the computer away, and for some reason decided to stay right in front of the door in the station and not go right out. We talked for a while to figure out if our station was haunted or not. This is when we heard what sounded like the door handle opening between the bay and the station. We just left. One thing I think I should clarify is that we were the only ones in the station. The other ambulance in the bay is a day car, and my ambulance is the night car. We got off 2 hours before the day car gets on, and it was a weekend, so that means the day car isn't even working. Overall, it was a spooky experience for me, but we haven't seen anything happen ever since then. When I was a baby, I was in foster care. My foster parents were old enough to be my grandparents. When I went back to my parents, I stayed in touch with them, but I call them my grandparents. This is relevant. My grandmother lives in a very beautiful, large and old home. Everyone in the town knows the blue house on the right with the pond. Anyways, my grandfather built the house for my grandmother many, many years ago. Think 20 or 30, maybe even 40. It was built from an old church and was big enough to house foster kids. Her house was always alive with kids when I was growing up, and it was a very happy home. I loved being there. She eventually retired. She's 77 now. She retired in 2009. She did many other things. One of those things was she was a first responder. She was a first responder both with my grandfather and after his passing in 2009. He died within the home, as well as her mom and his mom. My grandmother and her house have so much attached to her. She knows it. The only bad thing attached to her is actually attached to her house, and it's downstairs. She has a 2-story home, basically like an apartment, up top and down below. The house has a total of 2 kitchens, 2 living rooms, 7 rooms, 3.5 bathrooms, 2 laundry rooms, etc. Huge house. I vividly remember once standing at the bottom of the stairs, all the basement lights off, a room directly in front of the stairs, and as I'm messing with the baby gate, everything in my body said, "Don't look up at the doorway, close the gate and go." And I did just that. That one room just gives me the creeps. I was once sitting on the couch upstairs. I stood up, my grandmother in the kitchen, and stopped where I was to stretch. And something ran from the kitchen through the living room and directly up to me. Nothing was there. It didn't scare me, and when it got to me, it just stopped. I took a step back because I honestly swore something was going to run into me, but I had no fear in my body. I was sleeping in a room with the sliding glass mirror door to the closet on one side of the bed, and a sliding glass door leading to a sunroom that ran the length of the house and could be accessed by multiple doors on the other side. I watched through pink curtains a lady on a dress walk back and forth in front of that glass door for a while one night. No one goes in that room. No one was awake. I have a video from another door in that room opening and closing on its own. Love that house. A little over a year ago, I was home alone as my parents and siblings went out. I was casually doing my makeup upstairs in my bedroom, playing music and singing loudly. All of a sudden, I hear the loudest bang on my bedroom door. I mean, it sounded like someone tried to kick through the door full force. It was that loud. My bedroom door was closed, so there was no chance of it being slammed shut, and it was way too loud for it to have been the wind. I just froze. I had so much adrenaline running through my body. My first thought was my parents had come home, and it was just a way of my mum telling me to shut up because of my singing. I ran to the window, and my heart dropped to see there were no cars outside. I secondly thought maybe someone was in the house, but I live on a smallish island called Guernsey, so the chance of someone being in the house was very unlikely. I phoned my mum to tell her what happened, and even though she seemed a bit freaked out, what happened next made my mum's heart stop. Shortly after my mum arrived home, she told me that after our phone call, my sister, who was only 3 at the time, piped up in the back seat. "Maybe it's the man in your bedroom, Mummy." This was extremely creepy coming from a 3-year-old. We asked her some questions about what the man was like. She said he's a nice man, and he sits on a bed sometimes, but he's mostly in Mummy and Daddy's room. She said he wore tights and a gown, had big white eyes. We then gave this man the nickname, the man with the big eyes. We asked her the same question from time to time, and she'd always give us the same answer. Since that day, we've had more paranormal things happen, but I can't name them all. My sister occasionally would mention the man with the big eyes, about how she saw him last night, or that she spoke to him. One day, she had a friend over, and they both came rushing into the back garden, and my sister shouted, "Look, we can see the man from here." And from the back garden, you can see my parents' bedroom window. I haven't really heard anything of this man for a while, and I really hope I don't hear of him again. For some background, he lived with his parents and his home was pretty secluded, but near to the suburbs area at the time, and his mom was home with him and she was in the shower at the time of this occurrence. So the story goes that he was sitting in his room with the window open, doing his regular relaxing thing, when from outside the house he heard his mom call out from the outside, asking him where he put the shirt he had borrowed from her. He didn't borrow such a shirt, and he replied by saying as such. He thought it was weird that his mother was outside and asking about a shirt, but he wrote it off. He looked out his window and couldn't see this mother anywhere, so he got up and out of his room, realising that the water was still running in his parents' shower. Weirded out, he went downstairs and called out for his mom, and her voice answered from behind the shut and locked front door. He says that her voice was very sweet and tender, using a tone she would have used when he was little, when she asked him, "Please let me in." And then he says he heard the water shut off from the shower, as then the sounds of claws rolling down the front door could be heard, as the voice of his mother could be heard from behind the front door again, asking to be let in, followed immediately by a "I love you," with the sounds of claws rolling still being heard. He very quickly backed away from the door and went upstairs to retrieve his revolver. But as soon as he came back downstairs, the voice and the rolling claws were gone. No trace. No nothing of who or what it could have possibly been. So I'll start this by saying these events all happened years apart, and the first encounter isn't exactly a shadow, but I think it ties in. So many years ago, maybe like 20 or a few more, I was just a child, and like a lot of children, I was afraid of the dark. Most nights, I would walk down the hall to my parents' room and ask my father to stay with me until I fell asleep. This particular night, I remember being awake as my dad slept beside me on his stomach. My bed at the time didn't have a solid headboard, but bars that you could either put a hand through or under. At some point during the night, I lay there on my side with my hand under my pillow, and suddenly I felt a hand come up from under the metal bar of the headboard. I distinctly remember it being bumpy and rough, but definitely a hand, and to this day, I struggled to believe it was my dad's, since it felt all wrong as well as the positioning of it, seeming to me to be too difficult for a person to comfortably achieve, even accidentally while sleeping. The shadow in the hall, perhaps a year or so later, I remember waking again during the night, feeling somewhat scared, and decided to walk down the hall, as I had done many times, like I mentioned before. I reached my parents' door, and sure the handle, it's locked. Not a big deal. I can manage a night alone. That is, until I turned back towards my room. I had partially closed the door when I left, and could faintly see the light from the streetlight coming through my window, but suddenly that light was blocked almost entirely, and my door began slowly to open wider. Now, I did what any kid would do. I screamed and began pounding on my parents' door. It was only a few moments before they opened it, but it felt like forever. They took a look down the hall, lights on and everything. They found nothing, of course, but I knew better. Lastly, the figure in my dream and then in my room. This happened only about a year ago. I was 28 at the time. I was sleeping and dreaming, which is unusual for me. In the dream, I stood in an old cobblestone alleyway, old buildings on all sides, and a fog rolling in. I knew there was a figure walking towards me, but I had it in my head to jump out and scare them. So I hid in a smaller alcove, waiting. The moment arrived, the figure should be right outside the alcove. I tried to jump out. I can't move. I'm not frightened, more annoyed that my lame prank won't happen. Their figure turns the corner looking at me as if knowing I was there. It's a completely black shadow with lighter grey ripples, almost like smoke, covering its entire form. It leans in close, and in almost a whispered voice, it asks me, "What do all little boys like?" Now I'm a sarcastic fuck, and I'm not frightened at all, so I reply, "Pee-pee touches," in a mocking voice. Suddenly, the alleyways are gone, and I get a sense of immediate danger. But then I can see my room clear as day. The figure is in the corner and moving slowly towards me. I blink, it's closer. I blink again, and it's at the foot of my bed. I still can't move, but I'm fighting to. It reaches for me, and I bolt upright, and it's gone. Haven't seen anything since. I'm active duty military and was stationed in Okinawa for 3 years. During that time, I had a lot of weird experiences. One day after getting back from work, my buddy was planning on coming to my barracks room to chill, so I left my door deadbolt open and told him to walk in when he got here. During that time, I laid in my bed with my back to the door, just scrolling through my phone, when I felt something very clearly poke and drag a finger down my back. Naturally, I thought it was my buddy, so I looked back to greet him, but only saw an empty room. The door hadn't been opened, or I would have heard it, and my friend wouldn't have been able to move fast enough to come in and out silently. Another time, I was drinking coffee or tea late at night before bed. I didn't finish my cup, but set it on my nightstand, where it wouldn't fall or get knocked off and passed out. Around 3 in the morning, I wake up to it crashing to the ground. Okinawa does get frequent earthquakes, but usually never bad enough to knock a cup off the centre of a stand. Otherwise I'd have woken up. Also during my time there, lights in the room that weren't ever used frequently turned on by themselves or flicker. Things would get moved from their original spots. And despite never having sleep paralysis prior to my time here, I ended up getting it on a regular basis, at least twice a month. Since leaving, I haven't had sleep paralysis once. I've also felt an overwhelming sense of dread on a few occasions, out of the blue. In fall of 2018, I started my freshman year of college. To preface, the dorm building I moved into was a renovated seminary building on the banks of the Mississippi River. The seminary school was originally built in the early 1800s, but closed years later, and my college purchased it in the 90s. They renovated it and then opened it in the early 2000s, dedicating the campus to fine art students. The dorm hall was one of 3 buildings on the campus. The building's first floor held classes and the dining hall, and the second and third floor were the dorm rooms. The doors were suite style, so I had a roommate, 2 suite mates, a living room, kitchenette, and bathroom. These details were important. Upon moving in, things were normal for the first couple of days. Then, weird things started happening. My decor started falling off the wall, even though my roommates and I all used the same command strips. I would hear running and the fridge slamming outside my room, when I was certain my roommates had all gone to class. I would nap and wake up to my room door being open, when I knew for a fact I shut it, and you needed a key card to the room to open it. Each of these I rationalised. I heard the fridge slamming because one of my roommates came up from class to grab a drink or food and needed to get back. I got the faulty command strips from the bunch, etc. However, the second week of school, my sweet mate thought it would be a good idea to put all our schedules on the fridge so we would know when the others were in class. This was when I realised that the times I had been hearing the fridge slam shut and running, I was in fact the only person in the room. I even asked my roommates if they had come back, and they said they hadn't. That night started a week-long streak of waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. I would wake up around 3 a.m. feeling like someone was pushing on my chest, and I couldn't move or breathe. One of the nights was so bad. Once I was able to move, I ran to the bathroom and sat under cold water and called my mom bawling. The next day, when my roommate got back from class, she told me about a student she overheard wondering what students had moved into our dorm room number because she wanted to talk to us. About half an hour later, this really petite girl shows up at our dorm room, asking if anything weird has been happening, all while staring intently at me. Obviously, I say yes, and then she proceeds to tell me what happened the year prior. The group of people who lived in our room the year prior used a Ouija board and accidentally ended up drawing a malevolent spirit to the room. She explained that she was in touch with the spirit realm and they didn't think the entity was still there, but its energy remained along with some others that were drawn to it, one of these energies being a woman. Then she focused all attention on me again and said, "It's been picking on you, hasn't it?" I then proceeded to explain everything that had been happening, to which she responded that she could tell that it was targeting me because I had a very bright light energy. However, she paused for a second before stating that she felt a protective energy with me in the room and asked if I had any relatives pass away recently who may be protective over me. I immediately responded yes, as I've had many family and friends pass over my lifetime. But what she asked next gave me chills. She proceeds to ask with her head cocked if my relative's name was John. My grandpa John passed away shortly after I was born. I barely knew him, and there was no way she could have known his name. Stunned, I nodded, and she explained not to worry too much, because he was just there to protect me. After she left, my roommates and I kinda made it all into a joke. We stupidly gave the female ghost a name, Avery, and deemed her an honorary roommate to try and lighten the situation. Later that week, my roommate and I were sitting in bed when a mirror of mine fell off the wall. I, frustrated that it was only ever my things that fell off the wall, yelled, "Damn it, Avery!" and instantaneously, my cross fell off the wall. However, when I picked it up, I noticed the command hook was still on the wall, meaning my cross couldn't have just fallen off. It would have had to have been lifted off the hook in order to fall. My roommate and I looked at each other, jaws dropped, and erupted into a fit of nervous laughter. After that, nothing ever really happened again. The next semester, one of my sweet mates commented that we haven't heard from Avery in a while. The following morning, I was headed out the door to go to class and walked by one of the mirrors in the dorm room. In the reflection of the mirror, I caught a glimpse of a pale woman with dark long hair and a white nightgown standing right behind my shoulder. I skeeted out of the dorm room so fast and did not look back. The next day, my roommates and I were all sitting in the living room, and the one who made the comment about not hearing from Avery said, "Oh, by the way, I saw Avery today." The entire room went quiet, and each of my roommates' face went pale. I quietly said, "I did too," followed by my other roommates stating the same. We each exchanged what we saw, and when each of us saw the same thing. That truly was the last time we encountered Avery. When we moved out in the spring, we decided that that was her way of saying goodbye to us. I'll always wonder though if the students who moved in after my roommates and I ever experienced anything. Everything started just 1 year ago last month. We're all still in high school and are trying to get answers. For context and credentials, so the story is believable. I live on the eastern side of Ohio, near the Appalachian Mountains. When the foundation of my house was being built, In the dirt that was being moved, they found an insane amount of arrowheads. I live on a rather large hill and have around 45 to 50 acres of land. My family had an archaeologist come, and he said he's never seen this amount of arrowheads in one single site before in his entire career. It is believed that my house was dug onto a burial ground of where a war took place long ago in the Native American era. To further this, on my property are old railroad tracks, unused now, but in the 1800s used frequently. According to my town's records, a train crashed and blew up here, killing a group of men on board. So it begins. The first night all started a year ago last month, September 25th, 2021. A group of my friends, me plus 5 others, were at my house for a bonfire. It's been something we usually do, and just to say, we do not drink while we have our fires, so we're all in our right minds. To start, I got up to put some more wood on the fire. As I was doing so, we all thought we heard my mom yell for us, "Hey!" So I called her, and she claimed she was laying in her bed watching TV and had never gotten up. We played it off as our minds playing some tricks, and we were just hearing some things. As the night went on, we started to run out of firewood. Me and 2 others walked down to the bottom of my hill to get some more wood. When we came back up, the other 3 friends were gone. Just a joke they were playing on us, because that's just how we are together. We think, oh, just let them go for a little bit, without trying to look for them, and they'll eventually get bored. A few minutes go by, and the 3 of us who weren't hiding heard this blood-curdling, screeching scream off in the distance. We immediately get worried and nervous that it's one of our friends. We look into the distance that the scream is coming from, and we see nothing. The screaming stops and then starts again. We start yelling for our other friends and calling their phones. All of a sudden, 2 of them pop out and start asking us questions about why we look so freaked. We explain to them while still wondering where the last one of them is. The last person comes out, and we begin to explain to him. An expression fell onto his face, and we knew he had something to say as well. As he was alone, crawling up the side of the hill, getting ready to scare us, he heard someone ask, "Who are you?" in a man's voice. After telling him that no one lives there, and it's owned by my family, he immediately freaks out and says, if no one lives there, then there's someone out here with us. We all run down to my house and immediately tell my mom about everything that we've heard. We go back out, search the house that my family owns to be sure there's no one sneaking in and living there. There was nothing. No one. My friends leave a few minutes later. I go back to the top of the hill to get my car that I drove up. As I'm up there, I hear screams, as if someone was in pain screaming, moaning and groaning very loudly. I get in my car, drive to my house, and quickly go inside for the night. This is just the beginning. Night 2 was just 1 month later, on October 23rd, 2021. The same group of us were out there having a fire, -2, plus my dog. 2 of my friends couldn't make it that night, so there were now 4 of us and my dog. Curious, we decide that we're going to try to be a bunch of badasses and go out and explore my woods. The woods we went to are located on the opposite side of my hill from where my house is. The chunk of forest takes up 80 to 90% of the land my family owns. We start a little fire, go through the game plan, and then we walk. They're all following me with flashlights because they obviously do not know my land. I know every single inch of my woods because I used to spend a lot of time back there. As we're walking, one of my friends asks, "What's down here?" So I take us down towards the railroad tracks where we hear some brush break. Thinking it's just a deer or an animal, considering we are in the middle of the woods, we brush it off and just keep walking. I take them down to a clearing. It's a place that leads back to the top of the hill if we would have kept walking straight. It's a deep but small valley type area. All of a sudden, as we're walking, we all hear the loudest boom noise that we've ever heard. It was as if someone had let off a dynamite in the tree lines above us. My dog even jumps.
We ran about 50 feet before regathering and trying to figure out what just happened. At this point, we're in the lowest part of the valley area. I shine my light towards my dog and he's running away back to the top of my hill. In my mind, that scares me because he's a German shepherd who's killed a coyote. I tell my friends to keep an eye out around us to see anything. Me and one other see a set of blue eyes in the opening behind us. They move left and disappear, then come back again moving right. At this point, we're all looking at them. We watched this happen 2 more times and then the eyes didn't come back. Scared that whatever it was on the move, we ran back to the top of my hill. We took a break for a while, decided it was best to leave the sleeping bear lying alone. 8 months later in the summer, I have a fire. There was a lot that happened between 2 of my other friends and our foreign exchange student went back to Spain. That limited the group to 3. Me and 2 others are just chilling out around a fire. Us 3 have done this around 4 or 5 times now, and the same thing happens every time. We hear faint whispers but can never make out words. We hear brush moving. We hear cows that sound like they should be 20 yards away, yet the farthest farm is around a mile. Cows, along with other weird animal noises, none of us can make out. And one of my friends is an avid hunter and knows his stuff well. As odd and as weird as it all seems, ever since a year ago around this time, I've been getting deja vu. It scares me every time I get it because when I do, something bad happens. Just some examples. My uncle died the next day. I had to put my dog down the next day. My girlfriend's mom had a heart attack. My girlfriend got into a car accident. I broke out into hives and many, many other examples I could list on forever. Along with the deja vu, I've had a recurring dream. Long story short, I'm walking in my woods. 2 of my friends disappear and then there's a black outline staring at me. As I continue to have this dream over and over again, every time I do, I wake up and sweat and see the thing that was in my dream in my room, just staring back at me. I can hear this thing whispering but cannot make out the words. After a few seconds of its presence, it goes away and I somehow can go straight back to sleep. In addition to the nights at my house, me and a group of friends decide to go to the famous Egypt Valley. Out to Louisa Fox's grave, death location, and to the Circle the Cemetery, one of the oldest cemeteries in the area. I'll spare you the details of all those areas. If you want to know, look them up. They are rather famous. Anyways, we go out to these locations, and as we're walking back to our cars, there are handprints on the one I was riding in. My friends swear it wasn't them. One set of hands was freakishly huge, and the other set was very tiny. We compare sizes, and none of our hands fit the ones on the car. Ever since all of this, my life has been rather horrible. Very few things have gone well for me, whether it be death of loved ones, death of a friend, death of a pet, sickness, injury, or vehicle accidents. Holy shit. As I type the last sentence, I get deja vu. I can't take this anymore. It's getting so hard to wake up every single day. I hate sleeping for fear of dreaming, and I hate being awake for fear of deja vu. I don't want anyone else to hurt me because of me. My friends and my family believe that a native spirit haunts my lands. Some of my friends believe that it's the men on the train. My family and I are religious. I've tried to get closer to God and try to be a better Christian, and it has helped. My dreams went away for a little while, but as the time grows closer to the second encounter, it's getting worse than it's ever been. I have no idea what to do. All I want is some answers, or for someone to tell me I'm not crazy. All of the facts I've given, aside from the archaeologist, are from the town records, from my town's library. The info about the natives comes from simple online research about which tribe lived in the area I am. Sure enough, the coordinates of where my house is, compared to the area lines of native tribes, sit perfectly on the split between Shawnee and Cherokee, which would explain the amount of arrowheads and possibly what the hill I currently live on is used for. Someone, please help me. I've only experienced sleep paralysis once before in my life, and it's one of the most terrifying moments I've ever experienced. Long story short, it was maybe 8 years ago when I was in my 20s and single, living in an apartment. Something woke me up in the middle of the night, but I was paralysed and felt like I was floating a foot above my bed. That freaked me out enough, but when I looked at the foot of my bed, I saw a black figure standing there, watching me, that completely filled me with fear. That went on for what felt like several minutes, and I couldn't escape or fully wake up or snap out of it. And then the figure jumped on top of me and shoved me by my shoulders back to the bed and disappeared. And I fell to the foot of my bed, and the falling sensation in my stomach and the bounce of the bed is what finally snapped me out of it and let me fully wake up. I don't think I even want to know what that was about. I'm Christian and prayed to God so many times to protect me from whatever that was, and prayed in Jesus' name that no demons or evil spirits could live inside me or attach themselves to me or where I lived in any way. And I never experienced that again. So now, this morning, I'm married and sleep on the side of the bed by the window, and there are no blinds covering it, and it's been a fullish moon. So the room has been pretty well lit at night this week. Something stirred me to wakefulness in the middle of the night or early morning. It was still dark outside, and I got this weird feeling that it was in the 3 o'clock hour, because something just felt off. But when I went to check my phone, I realised my arm didn't move to grab it. That's when I realised I was awake, but experiencing sleep paralysis again. I felt like when you're so tired, you can't keep your eyes open, like I was fighting to wake up or stay awake. But I could see my room and window from my vantage point of laying on my stomach, with my head facing the window on my pillow. And as I was trying to snap out of it, and either fully awake or fall back asleep, that's when I heard the voices. They were there, right there. Not in my head, like I actually heard them with my ears, and only my left ear, since my right ear was on the pillow. I didn't see anyone, just heard the voices. It sounded like 3 people at once. The loudest and closest was the voice of a young woman, and she sounded like she was standing by my bed and leaning over me. Her voice was so loud and clear and close. She said, "Physical illusion, is that you? Are you here?" At the same exact time, the voices of 2 young men, who sounded like they were further away, like at the foot of my bed, said, "Hello?" and something else I couldn't make out. They were kind voices, and they were in the polite questioning tone, like when you think you hear a noise and you say, "Hello, is anyone there?" But still, they were disembodied voices in my room, in the middle of the night. So naturally, they scared the crap out of me, and I tried to snap out of it faster and yell my husband's name for help. And I heard myself yell, "John!" muffled, as if yelling underwater. That snapped me out of it though, and the echoing voices immediately ceased, and I was able to sit up, and my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I curled up to my husband until I could fall back asleep. I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin, until I was about 7. If I believe correctly, Wisconsin is a hotspot for the supernatural, which could have easily explained many of these things, I'm sure. They're nothing extravagantly terrifying or film-worthy, but they definitely will stick with me for the rest of my life. Here are some of the occurrences. First and foremost, I'm going to preface this by saying that it was factual that the previous owner of the house had killed himself. My mom was told this by our next door neighbour, who had lived there for a while, shortly after we moved in. But he quickly retracted the statement, saying, well, he didn't kill himself in the house. My mom had a digital radio in her bedroom, on the dresser. I just remember being in there and noticing that it suddenly turned on by itself, because I saw the blue numbers on the analogue clock light up, and it wasn't on a second ago. As a 5, maybe 6-year-old kid, I was only mildly confused by this. She was in the room at the time, I believe, and noticed it, but somehow didn't freak out, which I later learned was because she didn't want to scare me by saying something or making a big deal out of it. This was an experience only I was witness to, but once I was sitting in the backseat of the car, I think in the parking lot of my grandma's apartments at night, and sort of just blankly staring at the streetlights when I saw this strange form pass underneath it real quick and then disappear. It wasn't the shape of a person or anything, just an abstract, transparent figure. I didn't tell my brother or dad, who were waiting in the car with me, because I couldn't explain it as a 4-year-old, and I didn't feel particularly scared by it. I simply thought it was odd. Apparently though, I did at one point tell my mom that I saw things in my room at night, because she mentions to me whenever I say I don't recall actually seeing a ghost in the house. I don't, and little kids say creepy things all the time, but she thought this was additional proof of supernatural presence. I guess it could have just slipped my memory. She was insistent on that because she didn't want to think she was going crazy and seeing things. And considering all the other strange stuff that happened, I really don't believe it was just her imagination. According to her, she would sometimes look over in the corner of the room when she woke up and would see a shadowy figure sitting on the chair there. But she emphasises that the figure was not menacing at all and never tried to harm her, and that it looked sad, like it was hunched over in its seat looking down. Not like an evil spirit, but rather a lost soul that had nowhere to go after death. Halloween was an incredibly popular holiday there, celebrated more than Christmas, which is likely why it's my favourite now, and always has been. Everybody went all out, yards full of witches and zombies, glowing orange lights decking the porches and roofs, giant inflatable jack-o'-lanterns, you name it. My mom would take me trick-or-treating around our neighbourhood, and nothing particularly weird or creepy ever happened while we were out, but I do distinctly recall one unnerving thing. There was this one house we'd pass every year that had blood splattered on the door. And I don't mean the fake blood you get at a Halloween store. I mean like genuine, actual blood that came from something once living. It's not too hard to tell the difference between even the most realistic fake blood and the real deal. And both my mom and I were freaked out by it. Presumably, whoever lived in that house obtained it from a butcher. But I can't help think that maybe there was a more sinister reason behind it. People passing our house would habitually stop and stare. It wasn't that fancy a house, and we didn't have anything interesting or eye-catching outside. But anytime anyone would walk by on the sidewalk, they would stop and stare at it for a moment before carrying on. To this day, I have no clue what they could have been looking at, but it was certainly bizarre. We would often see a man in the area while heading out of our neighbourhood when driving that was dressed in all black from head to toe, like an emo kid gone extreme. That wasn't in itself weird. What was weird was that there was this soulless emptiness in his eyes, unlike anything I'd ever seen before and haven't seen since. It was like he was well and truly dead inside, not even strung out on drugs, but instead a husk of a man whose body was being used as a vessel for something truly eldritch. It may not sound scary because it's hard to really put into words, but it's an image that has always stuck with me, and my mom, who witnessed it as well.